The sea mist rolling over Blackwater Bay arrived long before the dawn. It crawled in ragged skeins across the water, gray enough to seem ordinary, yet dense enough to swallow the lantern light on the quays. Dockhands cursed and fumbled, unable to see their own knots. Fisherfolk spoke of winter merrows rising from the deeps. No one saw the first shards of frost forming on the ropes until they bit skin like tiny teeth. And by then the tide itself had grown sluggish, as though some vast unseen presence were stilling the bay in its grasp. Along the ramparts of King's Landing, sentries stamped their feet for warmth. They were not men bred for northern cold. Many had never known a snowfall heavier than a dusting on the Red Keep's tiled roofs. The fluttering pennons atop the King's Gate sagged, stiffening into white-rimmed ribbons. One guard, a pimply Westerlander barely past squirehood, pressed his gloved fingers to the bulwark and felt the stone sweating ice beneath his touch. He muttered a prayer to the Seven, and flinched when the wind answered, low and mournful, like a horn blown far out at sea. In the moldering throne room below, Queen Cersei Lannister held court with the brittle poise of a woman balanced upon a creaking branch. Her green eyes glittered with a confidence forged of necessity. To falter now, with enemies at every wall, traitor, northerner, dragon, and debt alike, would be to invite the final shove. She could not fathom yet another foe, but the chill wormed under her lion pelt cloak all the same, and even the braziers seemed reluctant to blaze. "Reports from the Gold Road," announced Qyburn, unfurling a parchment whose edges had already begun to crisp with frost despite the brazier between them. "Villages abandoned, crops frozen in the fields, a single survivor found outside Hayford, her mind half gone with fright. She repeated one phrase to our riders, 'Blue ghosts in the snow.'" Silence followed, broken only by the sizzle of pitch on wood. Cersei's fingers tightened on the wine cup. She tasted copper behind her teeth and realized she had bitten her tongue. "Snow," she repeated, as though the word itself were a trespass. "Then the Northerners march faster than ravens fly. Jon Snow seeks to freeze my kingdom more surely than his sister would starve it." "There is no army, your grace," Qyburn murmured, his voice too soft to hold warmth. "Only winter without end, and things that walk within it." Cersei's gaze sharpened. "The dead tale? The one he peddled at Dragon Pit?" "The same. It appears the tale peddles itself now." Some of her court crossed themselves in the sign of the Seven. The hall reeked, suddenly, of fear. An odor like singed hair and sour milk. Yet Cersei refused. Fear was a poison, and she had drunk her fill. This time she toppled the cup, letting red wine pool across the marble, like spilled heart's blood. "We have walls thicker than northern keeps, wildfire enough to burn the fleet of Volantis. Let these frozen phantoms batter themselves to pieces. If they are truly dead, wildfire may not suffice," Qyburn warned. But before he could elaborate, the mirrorish glass of the great window creaked like timber hulls splitting on reef. Frost spidered across its colored panes, blotting out the sunrise beyond. That same morning Jaime Lannister woke in the Tower of the Hand, his stump throbbing inside its golden shell. He dreamt he had two hands again, both of flesh, and each finger burned with a cold so exquisite it felt hot, as though plunged into dry ice. When the dream fell away, the chill lingered. His breath fogged in the bedchamber. Curtains cracked where they brushed the floor, stiffening into sheets of horror. He dressed without summoning servants, best they not see how the false hand rattled on its pin, and strode through corridors glazed white. Icicles formed along the stone gutters where rain normally sluiced. That rain had frozen mid-flow, a snaking sculpture of liquid arrested by something older than winter. At a turn he nearly collided with Brienne of Tarth. Still wearing a cloak dusted by frost, she carried a roll of parchment pinned shut by a wolf's head seal. The Stark sigil, black against ivory wax. "You should be in the north," Jaime said, voice rasped, raw by cold. "Not freezing your honor off in a city that's about to eat itself." Brienne's blue eyes flashed. "The city won't have time. The dead are a league out, if that. Their advance is not like war, more like tide come in. Walls will not matter, Jaime." "Isenad," he swallowed. "And you brought me a letter instead of a sword." Brienne unsealed the parchment. "From Lady Sansa. She begs you, begs us to convince the queen to evacuate the innocents to Dragonstone. The island is still warm from the volcanoes. Fire opposes ice. Her knuckles whitened. She also writes that Arya saw the Night King herself at the Long Barrow outside Harrenhal. He raised every corpse in the crypts with a gesture. Jaime exhaled. He recalled Harrenhal's endless vaults and the blackened bones of victims burned centuries past. Dragonstone is 4 days by ship in calm seas. We may not have 4 hours. He looked down, realizing vapor curled from his mouth with each word. Gods. Even the air is dying. In the Street of Flour beyond the Red Keep, merchants discovered their barrels of grain had frozen solid overnight. Bread baked at dawn emerged from the ovens with glassy crusts. Ice flecked throughout the crumb. Rats fled the cellars, their slick gray bodies stiff and brittle, eyes glazed by frost. Children chased them, stooping to snatch the carcasses for firewood, as if flesh could burn. Septim ordained successor, a pinched woman named Gianna, preached at Baelor's steps that the long night foretold in ancient scripture had arrived to punish the city's sins. Yet her breath iced on her lips, and by midday Gianna herself fell silent, voice strangled by a throat frozen from within. From the battlements, the Unsullied stood sentinel, armor encrusted with rime. Grey Worm issued orders clipped and steady, but concern rimmed his eyes. He had survived Astapor's pits, slave revolts, Blackwater Bay's fires. None of those tasted like this. This silence inside one's marrow, this acceptance that blood might soon forget its heat. High above, Drogon beat wings heavy with accumulated frost, bellowing outrage at the cold. Every exhalation shimmered with flame that scattered snowflakes into hissing rain. Yet even Dragonfire seemed muted, as though some cosmic curtain smothered heat itself. Daenerys Stormborn sat astride his shoulders, hair whipping silver-white in the gale, and wondered if all her titles meant anything before a foe who did not care for thrones or freedom or chains. She thought of Jon, last seen riding south with a scant retinue after the Dragon Pit parley, hoping to persuade Cersei to send her armies north. Perhaps he froze upon the King's Road even now. Perhaps he fought beyond the frosted mists at the city's edge. Perhaps he marched with the dead. Tyrion Lannister believed otherwise. He will come, he told her atop the city wall, gloved hands tucked under his armpits, chain of office rattling with each shiver. Starks are like bad debts. They turn up when least convenient. Daenerys managed a wry smile, but her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, where the fog had thickened into a wall of pearl-white haze, swallowing farms, watchtowers, entire hills. Occasionally, shapes stirred within. Antlered silhouettes, toppled windmills walking on 2 legs, trees uprooted and carried like battering rams by invisible giants. Snow swirled above that haze in spirals resembling carrion birds. "You think humor armor against this?" she asked softly. "It keeps the teeth from chattering." Below them, the city prepared. Wildfire caches marked with sigils of the pyromancers were dragged from hidden vaults. Pitch cauldrons were hoisted to parapets. Septons led mass prayer. Red priests lit pyres to R'hllor. Bell towers rung warnings in bells too cold to resonate, their notes short, deadened clanks. Mothers bound their children in blankets and fled toward the docks, but found the water rhymed and the ships stuck fast, their hulls imprisoned in sudden ice. When the first whites crested the ridge north of the Mudgate, they came not as a horde but as quiet heralds, 36 shapes hobbling across the frozen fields, their flesh half-eaten by crows that now clung frozen to shoulder or skull. Spears of blackened wood jutted from torsos. Jaws hung open in permanent lament. One bore a knight's banner stub. House Rosby's brown dog, now stiff with ice. They advanced until arrows dropped them, shattering like earthenware on stone. Yet no steam nor spurting blood marked their demise, only a chalky dust that blew away on the wind. In the lull that followed, a hush settled on the ramparts. Then, faintly, the ground began to groan. It was not the groan of siege engines. No catapults rolled in that mist, nor the din of cavalry charge. This was older, deeper, a tectonic lament. The black earth north of the city wall cracked. fissures snaking in geometric patterns, and out of those wounds seeped a light that pulsed blue. From the haze emerged a colossal shape, an ice-bound mammoth skeleton, strung with sinew frozen glass clear, ribs crusted by glacial runes. Upon its back rode a figure all had seen once in nightmares. Slender, taller than any man. Eyes aflame with blue sorcery that transfixed and commanded. The Night King raised a hand and silence bowed to him. They said he fell at Winterfell. Jaime whispered, standing beside Brienne above the mud gate. They said many things, Brienne replied. She placed a hand on Oathkeeper's hilt, as if the sword could reassure itself. Valyrian steel, forged for dragon lords. Would it still sing against death incarnate? A horn blast sounded from the city interior, a relic from Aegon's conquest rarely heard. 3 blows. The signal for all defenders to ready final measures. The walls of King's Landing, ancient and once unconquerable, now felt thin as parchment. The Night King's gaze swept the battlements. He lifted a single finger. Ice ripped up from the ground like inverted lightning, spearing skyward toward the ramparts, forming crystal spires that grew, branched and fused into a cage of living frost, embedding itself into the wall. Masons screamed, flung from the merlons as the ice pushed them overboard, their bodies shattering on contact with the ground below. Grey Worm barked commands. Unsullied flung jars of pitch that burst into greasy fire, but the flames guttered where they touched that shimmering ice, as if starved of breath. One jar rolled back toward them, frozen solid before it could ignite fully. Across the city, bells tolled again, desperate. Cersei strode from the throne room onto a balcony, overlooking the Blackwater, mantle whipping. Below, lines of wildfire cauldrons waited. One spark, and the river itself would become green hell. Yet the bay was frozen, the wildfire unable to flow. She tasted defeat in the air like bitter almonds. Then a roar split the sky, and Drogon plummeted, wings tucked. His flame washed the northern field in a torrent of orange, and whites combusted in cascading waves. The mammoth's ice flesh sizzled, but only parts of it burned. Cavities opened, revealing runic ice beneath, unmelting. The Night King raised his hand again, and shards of sleet speared upward. 2 embedded themselves in Drogon's left wing, shearing veins membranes. The dragon shrieked, careening away toward the Red Keep in a pirouette trailing blue steam, where blood met unnatural cold. Daenerys held fast to the saddle, knuckles white. Tyrion watched her descent from the wall, heart hammering. The city's last great weapon limped, wounded before the battle truly started. South of the city, across frozen fields once green with vineyards, fires sprang to life. Campfires of men still living. A banner of the direwolf unfurled as Jon Snow rode at their head, armored in blackened steel flecked with hoarfrost, Longclaw at his hip. Beside him rode the Hound, face half-numbed yet determined. Sir Davos, cheeks raw and red. Yara Greyjoy on a shaggy northern horse, and Tormund Giantsbane, beard-crusted white, who laughed when he saw the wall of ice embracing the city. "That shiny bitch of a queen has her own wall now," he roared. "Shame it serves the dead." The northern host numbered fewer than 3,000. Survivors of the retreat from the Neck, men and women who had marched day and night through blizzards that ate torchlight whole. They carried dragonglass blades forged at Dragonstone, stowed in burlap to keep from snapping in the cold. Their eyes were hollow with sleepless terror, yet a grim resolve bound them. They knew why they had come, not to save a city that hated them, but to shield the living no matter the crests they bore. Jon's gaze swept the horizon. He saw the cage of ice wrapping King's Landing like constrictor vines. He saw the Night King raising more whites from beneath the snow, corpses of farmers and small folk who had fallen on the road. Every death along their march became this monster's conscript. Jon's jaw clenched. "Eagles!" he called, and a woman from the Wildling Scouts loosed a horned owl into the sky, its wings feather-edged by frost. The owl disappeared into the swirling haze, bearing word to any ally still south. The king in the north had arrived. In the Red Keep's courtyard, Drogon landed with a bone-rattling quake. Daenerys dismounted, slipping on ice that spidered along the flagstones even here. "He's hurt," she gasped, stroking scaled hide near the wounded wing. Her breath plumed, forming crystals in her braids. Tyrion arrived moments later, accompanied by Varys, whose bald scalp glittered with frost. "The walls won't hold," the spider said, voice thin. "The ice grows faster than wildfire burns. And the city is a coffin of bodies for the Night King's army." "Then we must flee," Tyrion insisted. "Cersei will never yield the throne. But she may yet yield her pride if she sees it's the only path to breathing tomorrow." "Flee where?" Daenerys demanded. "The seas freeze. The land burns with cold. There is no south far enough." Tyrion looked skyward at Drogon, who panted steam. "There is above," he whispered. "If dragons rule the sky, perhaps we can buy time." Daenerys met his eyes. In that instant, their shared past, victories, betrayals, ashes, compressed into a fragile truce bound by necessity. She nodded. Across the courtyard, Jaime strode toward them, Brienne at his side. "He wants the queen," Jaime said without greeting, nodding toward the northern wall where the Night King's silhouette loomed. "Take her away, and maybe he follows." Cersei stood at the balcony still, watching ice climb the columns below her like ivy. She clutched a goblet of now slush-thick arbor gold, eyes reflecting the blue pulses along the wall. When Qyburn whispered that Prince Jaime sought audience, her smile twitched, warm, terrible, and lonely. "My brother will tell me to run," she said. "I would rather die a lioness than live a rat." Yet when Jaime appeared, his golden hand dulled by frost, she faltered. "You look cold," she said. "A joke meant for childhood hearths, not this grave." "Colder than I ever thought possible." He reached her, extended flesh hand. "Come. There is still time to save Tommen's people, at least those who survive his city's downfall." "They are not his people," she snapped. But tears rimmed her lashes, freezing into jewels. "They never loved him as they loved his brother." "Love matters not," Jaime said, voice rough. "Only life. The realm can choose another king, if anyone survives to choose." "Illiamdar." She stared at his offered hand, at the ghost of trust between them. Somewhere beyond, the Night King raised both arms, and the very dead, embedded within the wall, stirred, shaking off stone fragments, crawling forth like newborns from eggshells of masonry. Cersei gasped. Jaime whispered, "Please." The first crack split the Red Keep's outer curtain. Ice spears burst inward, flinging masonry chunks across the courtyard. Drogon rose again, beating wings that cast hurricanes of shards. Daenerys scrambled aboard, reaching a hand down to Tyrion. He hesitated. He was no rider of beasts, until ice hissed through the air and impaled the cobblestones where he had stood. He clasped her forearm, and she hauled him onto the saddle behind her, small body pressed between ridges of scale. "Where is Jon?" she shouted over the wind. "Late, as always," Tyrion shouted back. Drogon launched, tail smashing a tower that crumbled in a rain of rock and frozen mortar. They ascended into iron-gray sky. From this vantage, the city looked like a jeweled brooch pinned to a corpse. The sea a plate of tarnished silver. The land a bleached skin. Threads of blue flame, the Night King's sorcery, wove toward the heart of the city like veins reaching for a heart. Outside the walls, Jon's host clashed with White's at the shattered fields of the Mudgate. Dragonglass arrows fell dozens, firepots hurled by wildlings ignited pockets of living flame. Yet each dead thing that fell spawned two more from corpses previously hidden under snow. Giants rose among them, rib cages aglow, swinging frozen tree trunks like flails that sent men flying. Jon fought at the vanguard, long claw blazing with pale fire as it met bones. Each strike shattered ice, yet each victory cost him another cut, another memory. He knew they could not break the enemy, only delay. A horn blast sounded behind. 3 deep notes, the signal to retreat into the city. Grey Worm had opened the Mudgate, now half consumed by ice vines. The northern host surged, trying to pour through before the frost sealed the breach again. Jon turned back once, saw Tormund wrestling a giant White in the boiling snow. The giant collapsed, pinning Tormund beneath. Snow swallowed Redbeard and Laughter both. Jon gritted his teeth, seized Davos' arm. Inside. But when they crossed the threshold, the ice followed. creeping over iron to form new bars. Those northerners, slower than the frost, found the gateway sealing around their limbs, trapping them half in, half out. Screams nodded with the sound of bones snapping as ice tightened like a smith's vise. John hacked with long claw to free them, but the blade slid off as though the ice were living steel. Above the city, Drogon banked. Daenerys saw the mudgates fall, saw John vanish beneath archways of ice, and a sound escaped her throat. A sound older than language, the wail of Valyria's doom. Flashes of prophetic terror burned behind her eyes. The Iron Throne encased in blue crystal, shadow of a horned crown atop it. She felt time contracting, all possibilities choking down to this frigid singularity. "Fly for Dragonstone," Tyrion urged at her back. Voice trembling, "Gather the remainder of our forces." "No," she hissed. "Not while he stands beneath us." She spurred Drogon into a dive. Tyrion clung with both arms around her waist, cursing gods old and new. They plunged across the rooftops, flames streaming from the dragon's throat. The torrent struck the Night King amid the broken outer wall, and for a heartbeat hope erupted. Fire swirled, a hurricane of ever-turning gold. Then the fire parted, split by an unseen will. Blue light answered, coalescing into a spear of crystal in the Night King's hand. He launched it skyward. Drogon rolled, but wounded, wing lagged. The spear grazed his flank, carving a furrow that leaked violet smoke. He screamed, wings faltering. Daenerys pitched forward. Only Tyrion's grip kept her from tumbling free. She tasted blood as her lips split on a scale ridge. She tasted fear, deeper still. Behind, Jaime escorted Cersei down crumbling staircases toward the stables, Brienne guarding their rear. Cersei wore a plain cloak now, colored like ash. She had left crown and lion pauldrons behind. They reached the yard where 5 horses stamped in circles of frost. The animals' breaths froze into halos around their heads. Cersei approached one, hands shaking not from cold, but the gravity of fleeing the city she ruled. "Your Grace," Brienne said, voice nearly gentle. "We must hurry." Cersei mounted with surprising grace. "Don't call me that," she murmured. "Not anymore." Jaime swung astride another horse, golden hand glinting like a fallen sun. He looked northward. Ice structures now bristled from the city walls like thorns, and dead men swarmed over ramparts. Above them, Drogon bled across the sky, spiraling. "We head east," Jaime commanded. "Follow the river to the sea. If it freezes, we ride the banks until we find open water." "And if there is none?" Brienne asked. "Then we ride anyway," he replied. "Better to die moving than stand and wait for the end." They spurred out the stables, hooves clattering on frost-caked cobble. Small folk streamed around them, fathers bearing silent bundles, mothers dragging half-frozen toddlers, beggars who had stolen Septus's woolen cloaks. Jaime's horse reared as a stampede of panicked goats burst from an alley, and he smelled roasting meat. The goats' hides had frozen so swiftly their bodies cracked upon impact. The exodus clogged the streets. Cersei shouted for passage, but her voice vanished into the wind. She realized that for the first time she was nameless in her own realm. The city did not behold a queen, only another refugee. Atop the ruined western wall, Jon scrambled over debris, Davos at his side, searching for vantage. He saw the Night King raise new columns of ice, forging them into bridges over the walls so the dead could pour within unchecked. He saw dragonfire falter. He saw hope, frail and flickering, like the last ember in a hearth left untended. He set foot on the highest parapet. Snow lashed his face. Beneath him, white scuttled across rooftops. Their claws left ruts of rime. In their midst, he glimpsed Arya darting between chimneys, blade of Valyrian steel flashing. She moved like a shadow caught in moonlight. There, gone, leaving corpses falling like marionettes whose strings had snapped. Jon's heart clenched. He cupped frozen hands and blew a whistle, one known only to the pack. Arya's head turned. She met his gaze across a gulf of dead things. She nodded once, vanished again into the blizzard of battle. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air. Blackwater's ice sheet buckled. From the depths rose something vast. The wreck of a ship long sunk during Blackwater Bay's fiery blaze. Now returned, timbers encased in ice, sails stiff as tombstones. White sailors clambered its rigging, and on its prow stood a second figure crowned in shards of frost, wielding twin icicles as swords. The Night King had a lieutenant, perhaps a queen, for her frozen tresses flowed about shoulders with perverse elegance. They steered the ghost ship toward the docks, ice forming a ramp as it slid across the frozen river like skates. The city's harbor defenses lay useless. Scorpions and chains sat buried under snow. Jon realized the attack came from every compass point, overwhelming any plan. A roar. Drogon again. He limped through the sky, flame choking. Daenerys saw the ice ship and loosed fire. The deck exploded in sparks. Whites burned, but the ship lurched onward, propelled by will alone. The frozen queen upon the prow raised her weapons, absorbing flames into the ice that she molded to thicker armor. Tyrion shouted above the wind, "We need light to burn the wildfire." Daenerys' eyes widened. "If I ignite those stores, half the city, half is already gone. But wildfire burns even in cold. Perhaps it burns cold itself." She looked down, saw the Viridian sigils painted onto barrels along the riverfront. A terrible choice weighed on her shoulders, heavier than any dragon. But before thought resolved, ice spears shot upward, striking Drogon's thorax dial. He screamed. Wing beats faltered. They plunged. They crashed onto the Grand Sept's square, scattering stone statues like dice. Tyrion slammed against a scale ridge, ribs cracked. Daenerys tumbled across icy pavement, came up gasping. Drogon lay curled, one wing bent at wrong angle, frost steaming from wounds. She reached his snout, pressed her forehead to blunt horns. "No, my heart," she whispered in High Valyrian. "Not yet." Around them, whites advanced, skeletal feet clacking on stone. Tyrion fumbled for a dragonglass dagger, hands numb. Jon saw the dragon fall, felt something snap inside. He leapt from the parapet onto a lower roof, then another, descending toward the square. White snatched at him, but he hewed through them. Davos followed, covering their flank. At the foot of the Red Keep, Arya met them, face smeared with ash-black ice. "She's down," she hissed. "They'll swarm the dragon." Jon nodded. Together, they sprinted through archways of ice that had once been merchant stalls. The air itself clanged like steel. Each breath sliced lungs. Daenerys stood before Drogon, flame coiling in her palm. Ror's gift or dragon's residue, none could say. She hurled gouts of fire to hold the dead at bay, but for every white incinerated, two more emerged. Then the Night King entered the square. He walked unhurried, sword of ice carved with symbols that glowed as if veins of glacier blood. His gaze fixed on Daenerys. Tyrion moved to interpose. The Night King flicked a finger, and spears of ice erupted under the dwarf's feet. Tyrion leapt aside, but one spear grazed his shoulder, freezing cloth to flesh. Jon vaulted over broken columns, landing between Daenerys and the Night King. Longclaw's steel shone pale against ice, the pommel wolf snarling. The Night King tilted his head, perhaps in recognition. He raised his sword. The sound of their meeting rang like breaking glass, amplified 1,000-fold. Sparks of ice and steel whirled. Jon's arms numbed with each collision. Frost crept up Longclaw's blade. He battered aside a thrust and riposted. But the Night King's reflexes were not mortal. The ice sword caught Jon's attack, turning the force to powder. Daenerys tried to close distance, but whites converged, pinning her behind Drogon's bulk. She hacked with Jorah's old sword, tears freezing on cheeks. Arya darted among pillars, searching for the shot she had taken at Winterfell, the dagger to the heart. She drew Catspaw's dagger, grip reversed. But here, there was no weirwood blessing, only endless dead. Lightning crackled suddenly across the sky. No storm brewed. The light emanated from the walls themselves, blue veins glowing, reaching nexus above the city. The Night King's grand design, the transformation of kings landing into a second ice wall, neared completion. Already, streets filled with white haze. Sound diminished. Hearts beat slower. Jon faltered. Longclaw grew heavy. The Night King's sword swept in an arc. Jon blocked. But the force hurled him into Drogon's wounded wing. He sprawled, dazed. Ice blossomed across his breastplate, fastening him to dragon scale. The Night King turned his gaze upon Daenerys. She met it with fury worthy of old Valyria. But her fire dwindled, her strength drained by cold gnawing at her very marrow. He raised his sword. Frost gathered along its edge until it blazed bright as a comet. A roar split the air. Not Drogon's, but another dragon's cry, raw with agony and ghostly echo. From the northern haze descended Viserion, corpse white, blue flame leaking between skeletal plates. The undead dragon circled, maw yawning to unleash destruction. Daenerys froze, torn between horror and maternal sorrow. The Night King's eyes reflected both dragons, the live one dying, the dead one living. He lifted a hand to claim the final piece of his victory. Arya burst from cover, leaping atop fragments of shattered statue, launching herself at the Night King. He pivoted, arm snapping up. Ice sword and Valyrian dagger met with shriek of metal. Sparks blue and white flew dodged you. Arya twisted midair, but a blast of cold hurled her back into column, breath knocked out. The Night King returned attention to Daenerys. Viserion descended, ready to drown her in blue fire. At that instant, Tyrion hurled himself at a wildfire jar toppled in the crash. His frozen shoulders screamed, but he smashed the clay against a flint protruding from rubble. Sparks sputtered, caught the leaking green fluid. Flames erupted, green, hungry, alive. Fire danced up a stream of spilled wildfire that wound like serpent toward larger casks, lining the square. Fire and blood. Tyrion shrieked, though the wind devoured his words. The wildfire raced, igniting barrels in chain reaction. An explosion lifted Drogon's tail. Shockwave bowled whites. Green inferno roared skyward, engulfing Viserion mid-breath. Dead dragonfire met wildfire. The collision birthed a nova of turquoise flame. Ice melted, then vaporized. Stone cracked. The Night King staggered, armor shedding shards. Blue flames licked his cloak. Jon wrenched himself free, lunging with Longclaw. He drove the wolf's steel into the Night King's side, but not the heart. The blade sank inches, jammed in ice ribs. The Night King's hand whipped around, seizing Jon's throat. Cold unlike anything human seared through flesh. Jon felt his heartbeat slowing, blood crystallizing. Daenerys, knocked to knees by blast, reached for a shard of dragonglass that had tumbled from a dead Unsullied's pouch. She crawled across ice slick with wildfire slush, each movement agony. She rose behind the Night King and plunged the shard toward his spine. The tip kissed ancient armor and shattered into glittering dust. The Night King turned, releasing Jon, who collapsed choking. He looked upon Daenerys with something that might be curiosity. He reached forward. Frost emitted from his fingertips, creeping toward her heart. In that pause, Drogon surged, mustering last reserves, and bit down upon the Night King's arm. Teeth of obsidian rent ice flesh. The Night King's expression did not change, but he swung his free arm, driving the ice sword into Drogon's neck. Scales split. Blue runes spread across crimson blood. Drogon roared with pain but held fast. His fire gland ignited one final time, spewing flame point-blank. The Night King was wreathed in fire, blue-green, orange swirling together. For an instant, he was obscured entirely. When the maelstrom parted, the Night King stood within a vortex of steam, flames still licking his form yet not consuming. His gaze glowed hotter, as though the fire fed him. He flung Drogon aside, an impossible feat, and advanced on Daenerys once more. Jon tried to stand and failed. His limbs betrayed him, cold fused to bone. Tyrion lay half buried under rubble, eyes fluttering. Arya crawled, ribs cracked. Above, the web of blue lightning across King's Landing's walls pulsed. Ice bridges hammered down. The city groaned. And north of the square, Cersei Lannister, cloak lost, hair plastered to her skull with frozen sweat, stood upon a rampart overlooking the carnage. Jaime and Brienne flanked her, blades drawn. Cersei gazed at the Night King advancing on the silver-haired rival she had hated, and for a heartbeat, satisfaction flickered. Then she saw the Night King's eyes turn toward her atop the wall, as though he sensed the last queen resisting. In that gaze she felt emptiness deeper than any well, the promise that hatred, pride, destiny itself meant nothing before oblivion. She remembered her children, faces blue-white in marble septs. She remembered a prophecy of a younger, more beautiful queen who would cast her down, and realized perhaps the prophecy had warned of ice, not beauty. She pulled a jar from the satchel Jaime carried, wildfire sealed with lion's wax. She looked at him. Together. Jaime nodded. Brienne understood and raised Oathkeeper. They hurled jars toward the Night King from 3 points on the wall, forming a triangle of green doom. The jars burst, but before the conflagration closed, the Night King flicked his wrist, and with that subtle motion all surrounding ice surged upward, forming a dome shielding him. The wildfire splashed, roaring green, but slid from the dome like rain from glass. Hope guttered again. Yet something changed. The dome's surface glowed red. No, red and gold. Valyrian glyphs appearing where ice met flame. The ice itself protested, cracking in lines that formed words in a tongue older than men. A shriek, crystals fracturing at harmonic resonance. Jon's eyes widened. Valyria, he croaked. He forced himself upright, feeling warmth through Longclaw's hilt, as if the sword responded to the glyphs. He gripped the pommel, recalled words the Targaryen queens of old whispered to wake sleeping stone. Dracarys, he wheezed, and Longclaw blazed with white fire. He plunged the sword into the dome. Ice split. Dot. The Night King snapped around, too late. Fire raced along the fissures, reaching wildfire still clinging. A thunderclap, not sound, but absence of it, swallowed the square. Light devoured the air. When sight returned, Jon stood alone amid a crater of steam. Longclaw smoldered, still lodged in ground where the Night King had stood. There was no corpse, only melting fragments of ice turning to water, water turning to vapor, rising in lazy spirals. Daenerys sprawled nearby, breath shallow but alive. Drogon lay beyond, chest heaving, wounds smoking with emerald residue. Tyrion groaned, half-conscious. Arya limped forward, eyes scanning for threats that no longer stirred. But the sky remained dark with snow. The ice bridges still crowned walls. Viserion's corpse hung impaled upon a spire of wildfire-infused crystal, yet countless wights continued their assault, leaderless but relentless. Jon bent, helping Daenerys up. Their eyes locked. Fear, relief, love, despair mingled. "It's not over," she whispered. "No," he agreed. And in their hearts sprouted a fragile spark. For if the Night King could fall, perhaps the dawn could rise again. They turned to face the city devouring itself. Flames and frost entwined. Somewhere bells still rang, cracked and off-key. Snow fell, silent, upon green fire. Well. The blast rippled through King's Landing like the tolling of 1,000 cathedral bells struck all at once. Stones rattled in their sockets. The great dome of the ruined sept shrieked as hairline fractures spider-webbed its surface. A keening rose from every alley where glass still clung to shuttered windows, vibrating until the shards leapt free and rained to the streets in sparkling sleet. In the unmoving air that followed, only the faint hiss of wildfire steaming against marble could be heard. A sibilant whisper, as though the city itself struggled to breathe. Steam drifted in veils through the square, masking figures and shapes so that friend and foe alike became silhouettes in a waking dream. Colors bled into one another. Emerald fire coursed along cracks in the cobbles. Pale blue embers glimmered where fragments of the Night King's ice armor melted to nothing. Orange tongues of ordinary flame licked torn banners and toppled carts. All merged in a haunted palette of twilight greens and ghostly violets that painted the frost-slick stones. Jon Snow knelt at the edge of the crater, every muscle trembling. His lungs felt flooded with shards of glass. Each breath drew cold so deep it burned hotter than wildfire. as though the chill itself were a flame inside him. Longclaw still jutted from the ground where he had driven it through the ice dome, the blade's pale surface faintly glowing, as though some residue of the ancient Valyrian runes that had flared upon the dome now lingered inside the steel. He pressed a gauntleted hand to the pommel, but it seared his fingers. Even through wolf-fur gloves the heat bit deep. He left the sword planted, not yet daring to pull it free. Daenerys crouched beside Drogon's great head, whispering to him in a voice cracked and raw from smoke. Steam rose from the dragon's nostrils with every ragged breath, mingling with the city's drifting mist, but the exhalations were shallow. She pressed her palm against a wound at the hinge of his jaw, where black ichor dripped onto stone, sizzling as it met patches of lingering frost. "He is breathing," she murmured, though her voice held little comfort. "The fire in him still lives." To Jon the words sounded as much a prayer as fact. Tyrion had dragged himself half behind a toppled pillar, where the stone still radiated warmth from the blast. Blood seeped through the rents in his doublet. He fingered the tear at his shoulder where the ice spear had grazed him. The cloth had frozen to flesh, but the wildfire heat had thawed it again, leaving a crescent of raw skin that oozed. He leaned his forehead against the pillar, dizzy. Somewhere in the shifting steam, he could hear the clash of steel on bone. The battle continued. Duller now, but no less deadly. Arya moved like a ghost through the haze, Catspaw's dagger reversed again in her grip. The shockwave had hurled her across the square, cracking 2 ribs. Pain flared each time she breathed, but pain had long been her companion. She stalked the edges of the crater, eyes scanning for movement. Whites still skittered at the periphery, though fewer and slower, as though the death of their master had robbed them of purpose. They milled in confusion, jaws opening and closing on empty air. Some clutched their own chests where no hearts beat, rocking as if listening for a rhythm that no longer existed. Yet they did not fall. "The lieutenant?" Arya called over her shoulder, voice echoing thinly. "The one on the ship? She's still somewhere in the city." She spat blood onto the ice. "The dead need a will to move. Kill her, and maybe the rest fall." Jon rose, unsteadily. "Then we find her." Davos appeared from the swirling mist, face streaked black with soot, white with frost, and red with blood not his own. Aesir said, "Half the streets are walls of ice. The rest are burning." He drew a breath that rattled. "Northmen rally at the fishmonger's square, but they'll not hold long. The whites, they don't know what they want, but they still swing." "Where's Grey Worm?" Jon asked, retreating with the Unsullied toward the Dragon Gate. "Says the outer yard there's still passable. Talking of forming a killing ground." Jon looked at Daenerys. "If Drogon can fly, he cannot." Her hand trembled on the dragon's cheek. "His wing is near torn. It will take hours to mend what salves can reach, and we have none." Her gaze lifted. "Rhaegal's gone. Viserion is gone. Drogon is the last." Tyrion lurched upright. Then the last must be preserved at any cost. He turned to Jon, eyes bloodshot. "We must shepherd the living beyond the walls. Open a path south. Ride for Dragonstone Old Town, anywhere this cold does not yet reach." Jon shook his head. "If we flee, the dead follow. If the lieutenant still leads them, they march until the world ends. So we cut off the head." Arya's voice, icy and intent. "Again." Daenerys straightened, wiping soot from her cheeks. "The docks," she said slowly. "She steered the ship there. If she survived the blast, it is where she'll return, to summon whatever still lies beneath Blackwater Bay." Her eyes flicked to Tyrion. "How many wildfire caches beneath the river?" "Dozens, but the largest lie closer to the rush, under the Guildhall." Tyrion rubbed his temples. "If the ice reaches them and she triggers something, 7, save us." "No gods left to pray to," Davos muttered. "Only the work." Brienne's silhouette emerged, supporting a limping Jaime. Cersei followed close, wrapped in a singed cloak, her hair caked with gray ash and white frost, so intermingled it looked as though time had aged her a decade in an hour. She stared at the crater where the Night King had stood, eyes haunted. "So he is gone." The words tasted strange on her tongue. "For now, Jaime said, voice hoarse. His golden hand was scorched green where wildfire had splashed it. But the dead are not. And the city burns. Cersei whispered, gazing out at streets beyond, where distant buildings crackled with unnatural flame, fed by ice-splintered timber. My city. Our city. Jaime's flesh hand closed around her wrist, gentle yet firm. And we can still save some part of it. If we are quick, and if pride is left behind. Cersei's gaze shifted to Daenerys, whose silver hair clung to her cheeks, now streaked with soot. Every instinct in Cersei's lion heart screamed to hate that woman, to blame her for the wildfire that devoured the Sept of Baelor, for the foreign horde within these walls, for the dragon that had humbled her power. Yet under the swirling snow there was no throne, no crown weight, only frost and flame. She inclined her head the barest fraction, a gesture none could mistake for fealty, but enough to signal truce. Tell me the plan, she said. They assembled a council around a broken cart half buried in ice. Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion, Arya, Brienne, Jaime, Cersei, Davos, Grey Worm, summoned by horn blasts and signal fires that somehow still burned blue-green along the parapets. Around them soldiers gathered, faces gaunt, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Northmen shivered in furs, unsullied shivered though their discipline denied it. Gold cloaks, those that remained loyal, looked upon lords and queens and bastards and saw only flesh desperate to live. The lieutenant commands what's left of their will, Grey Worm said, tracing lines in frost with the butt of a spear. Kill her, the whites perish. Or collapse, Davos corrected. May still freeze the streets. Could take hours to fade. Hours we may buy, Tyrion said, if we hold them here. His finger tapped the map, marking the fishmonger's square. And here. He tapped the dragon gate. We funnel them toward the docks. Light the wildfire under the piers. Burn everything. Cersei inhaled sharply. The piers hold the last grain stores. What grain feeds your people if they're dead? Tyrion said. Burn the docks, we trap the lieutenant. She loves the water, remember. And wildfire cannot freeze. Jon added. Nor dragon glass shatter in the heat. We coat spearheads and arrows with pitch. Brienne interjected. That gives our archers one shot before shafts ignite. One shot is all we may have, Arya said quietly, rolling Catspaw's dagger across her knuckles. Daenerys rested a hand on Drogon's brow. He will breathe if we clear the air. One pass with his flame can ignite the casks. Can he fly low enough? Jaime asked. Not long, not high, she answered. But far better than he can perch and wait to be frozen. Then we protect the dragon, Jaime said, surprising himself. Shield wall around him as he moves to the river gate. Archers atop the lion towers cover the street. Once the docks ignite, we fall back to the Sept and sweep any stragglers. Cersei's brows lifted. We? We, Jaime repeated, and his gaze met hers, unflinching. Silence spread, broken only by the distant howl of wind. Cersei's lips parted. Something fragile flickered in her green eyes. A memory of youth perhaps, when battles were stories told at supper, and victories cost only the turn of a page. She exhaled white vapor. Very well, she said. Wow. They moved like cogs in a rusted machine, each turn grinding but purposeful. Gold cloaks under Sir Jacelyn Bywater hauled cart after cart of pitch-dipped bolts to the battlements. Northerners hacked benches and doors and even the posts of brothels into makeshift spears, coating points with broken dragon glass, shards drawn from sacks mark-inked with the three-headed dragon. Unsullied, formed ranks along the fishmonger's square. Shields rimmed with hoarfrost, but held steady. Grey Worm walked the line, tapping each shield with the butt of his spear. A quiet benediction of loyalty that needed no words. In the Red Keep's courtyard, Tyrion supervised the mixing of wildfire with lamp oil, thinning the volatile substance so it might splash farther when hurled. Qyburn fussed near cauldrons, muttering calculations of blast radius and pressure waves. His breath came out in plumes that smelled faintly of cloves, as though he had chewed spices to keep teeth from chattering. Jaime and Brienne selected 200 mounted knights, half Lannister remnants, half Stormlanders who had ridden south chasing warmth that never came. They would escort Drogon, blocking alley mouths with horseflesh and steel, while the dragon limped toward the docks. Brienne's voice carried across the yard. You ride for every man, woman, and child who ever looked to these walls for shelter. Ride hard, ride straight. Fear is nothing but cold air. Let it pass through you and be gone. Some laughed, a ragged sound that froze weightless in the frigid draft. But laughter, however brittle, was life, and life was their only weapon. Jon gathered the last of the free folk, Tormund's loss still raw, and shared the plan. They grumbled at the notion of holding a square of stone in the heart of a southern city, but the grumble hid grudging pride. They had seen the fist of the first men fall, Craster's Keep burn, Hardhome drown in death. Yet here they stood, defending a land that once called them savages. He clasped the shoulder of a youth no older than Rickon would have been had fate allowed. Hold the shield line. When they press, push back. Remember, the dawn is promised to those who stand at the darkest hour. The boy nodded, jaw clenched, knuckles white on a notched axe. Arya vanished before orders could reach her. She slipped across rooftops, seeking vantage. Somewhere beneath the city, the Lieutenant of the Dead moved with glacial certainty. Arya meant to find the path she would take. As the weak sun dipped below walls now crowned with ice spires, the defenders lit torches soaked in oil mixed with flecks of obsidian. Flames danced black and silver on their tips, stinging the eyes of those who held them, but the light was heartening. A fragile imitation of dragonfire. Then the horn sounded. One long, mournful note from the northern wall, two shorter blasts from the east, then three in quick succession. Grey Worm's signal. The whites were coming. They poured through the shattered mud gate first, an uncoordinated surge that nonetheless possessed brutal momentum. Without the night, King's precise will they no longer marched in disciplined ranks, but stumbled, crawled, leapt in spasms of predatory instinct. Some still clutched weapons, others swung jagged limbs. What they lacked in structure they made up in ferocity, hurling themselves against unsullied shields with bone-splintering force. Grey Worm's command echoed. Hold. Spears angled, points black with dragon glass. The front rank of whites impaled themselves willingly, yet kept writhing even as the crystal ate into their frozen flesh. Unsullied in the second row stepped forward, thrusting over shoulders, skewering skulls. Each kill was followed by the hiss of vapor and the snap of limbs collapsing into lifeless ice. But for every white shattered, two more clambered over the pile. Some were fresh dead, small folk claimed on doorsteps only hours before, still in moth-eaten cloaks, their eyes black pits rimed blue. Among them strode a hulking behemoth, a knight of the King's Guard long thought buried in the city crypts after Maegor's holdfast, now risen, armor fused to husk. He carried a rusted greatsword in both hands, swinging in broad arcs that dented unsullied shields and sent spearmen sprawling. Grey Worm met the knight head-on, deflecting a blow with shield rim thrusting upward. The dragonglass spear point glanced off pauldron but gouged through gorget to seek the hollow behind. Steam burst from the fracture. Blue light leaked like spilled lantern oil. The knight bellowed, a sound like wind moaning through ruins, and staggered. Grey Worm wrenched the spear free and drove it again, this time between the visor slits. The creature fell, crashing through a brazier and showering sparks that burst into tiny green tongues, where they touched stray droplets of wildfire. In the chaos, Arya darted along the rooftops above. From this vantage the city appeared a cracked mosaic. Shards of orange fire, panes of green wildfire, serpents of blue ice winding through streets. She traced these ice veins back through alleys until she saw where they converged, toward the docks, toward the ghost ship. The vessel loomed against the frozen quay as though moored to another world. Its hull, half charred from dragonfire, steamed where wildfire residue still burned. Yet from its dark forecastle stair, a figure emerged. Tall, slender, wrapped in rags of armor that merged seamlessly with the ice plating her flesh. Her face was half concealed by strands of hair bleached white, lips bloodless, eyes twin auroras of cyan. In each hand she carried the same twin scimitars of glacial crystal. Arya crouched behind a twisted chimney stack. The lieutenant raised her sword skyward. At her gesture, ice erupted along mooring ropes, growing outward, until it reached the quay, securing the ship in frozen fetters. Then the figure strode down onto the pier, every footstep frosting planks that crackled but did not break. Whites clustered in her wake, sailors wearing tattered jerkins of houses long extinct. Children and dogs fused into grotesque assemblages of bone and black ice, half-melted crab traps still dangling from their limbs. The very sea lurched beneath them, sloshing up in slurries that refroze mid-air. Arya's breath puffed quietly. She knew she could not face this creature alone. Yet if the lieutenant reached the city center, everything fell. She slipped from rooftop to rope bridge, making silent haste toward the Dragon Gate, where Drogon's escort would soon pass. They would need warning. The plaza before the river gate had once hosted market days. Stalls laden with Marish lace, olives from the arbor, oranges from Dorne. Now, it was a battlefield of shattered wagons and frozen fountains. Drogon limped forward, feet crunching stone into grit. His injured wing trailed, membrane torn like shredded sail, but his head swayed alert, serpentine pupils tracking every flicker of motion ahead. Around him rode Jaime's cavalry, in wedge formation. Brienne led the point, her blue cloak streaming behind as banner. Beside her flew 2 Lannister pennons, crimson and gold. Though the fabric hung stiff with frost, the horses panted clouds. Their iron shoes slipped on rime, but the riders kept pace. Jaime looked over his shoulder at Drogon's vast shadow cast by torches. He remembered feeling once like a dragon among men, invincible, proud. But that was folly. Flesh was fragile. Souls more so. He tightened his grip on reins. The scars across his palm split and bled anew in the cold. They cleared the river gate just as the first whites spilled from adjoining streets, drawn by the scent of life. Brienne shouted, "Left flank!" Knights peeled away, shields angled. A crush of dead footmen slammed into them, men who had doubtless sold oranges here once. The impact rang hollow on steel, but the line held. Brienne's longsword, Oathkeeper, whirled, its Valyrian steel edge severing limbs that shattered to crystals. Jaime kept to the inner rank, gold hand steadying his sword hilt. He lunged, parried, cursed each time numb fingers threatened to drop the blade. Ahead, Drogon's nostrils flared with embers. A gout of fire rolled from his throat, not the full cone of earlier flights, but enough to wash a barricade of wagons in flame. Wood exploded, wheels burst, the path cleared. Knights wheeled aside to let the dragon through. Cersei, riding near the rear on a pale mare, watched with grim fascination. She felt the heat kiss her cheeks, welcome warmth, and realized tears had frozen on her eyelashes. Beyond the plaza, the avenue sloped gently toward the docks. There, barrels of wildfire lined both sides, marked with sigils of the Alchemists' Guild. Pyromancers scurried, painting runes of ignition onto the cobbles with lamp oil, trails leading to central brazier stands. Tyrion awaited them at the foot of the slope, leaning on a spear twice his height. "Dragon's breath must bathe the barrels," he called to Daenerys. "Flame darting along the avenue will ignite the runes. Then we run like hell." "No hero speeches," Jaime shouted as he reined in beside him. One speech, but the wind stole it. Tyrion's grin was a rictus. He turned and limped toward a stair that climbed the outer wall. Higher vantage would guide his timing, and perhaps keep him out of the blast radius. At Fishmonger's Square, Jon Snow braced in the shield wall, shoulder to shoulder with Grey Worm. Their line curved like a crescent across the wide space, anchoring on overturned fish stalls whose contents had frozen into grotesque sculptures of silver scales and crystal eyes. Whites surged across the ice sheet that once was a fountain basin, clawing, snarling. Jon's shield absorbed the first impact, jarring his elbow. He shoved, heard Grey Worm's command, "Advance one." The line stepped as one, spears jabbed. Dragonglass pierced skulls, scraping on stone as bodies collapsed. Steam rose, carrying a stench like wet earth, thawing. A horn sounded 3 streets away. The single note of retreat. Jon spared a glance. The green glow of wildfire flickered against the low clouds in that direction. Drogon's Pass had begun. "We hold," he roared. The next wave hit harder. Among them lurched two giant wights. Reanimated pit fighters brought south years ago for games in the capital. Their chains still dragged behind, trailing frost, rattling like distant thunder. One slammed into the shield line, shields buckled. A Northman screamed as chain links wrapped his neck. He was yanked over the ranks, flailing. Jon shouted to the wildlings in reserve. Arrows tipped with obsidian flew, thudding into the giant's chest, neck, eyes. Each arrow hissed, blue light sputtered. The creature staggered, but rage drove it. It swung a massive fist, swatting men aside like dolls. Grey Worm barked foreign orders. Unsullied nearest planted spears butt down, tips angled upward. The giant impaled itself midst stride. Dragonglass punched through ribs, lodging in marrow. A roar became a wheeze. The creature toppled, crushing three wights beneath. Jon leapt atop the fallen behemoth, using its body as ramp to the second giant. Longclaw flashed. He carved across the hamstring. Ice chips sprayed. The giant turned, two eye sockets empty where arrows protruded, goreless yet raw. It swung a chain studded with iron hooks. Jon ducked, rolled, came up behind knee. He plunged Longclaw deep, twisting. The giant stumbled. Davos and a knot of wildlings swarmed, axes hacking until the massive form collapsed in slow motion, shaking the square. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the wights shrieked anew. This time, a note of panic, if such creatures could feel it. Jon saw their heads twitch toward the docks. The lieutenant called. "Brace," Grey Worm said, and they readied for the next tide. Daenerys guided Drogon to the head of the avenue. The dragon's wounds steamed, skin beneath cracked scales glowing faint red from internal furnace. She could feel his pain like echoes in her own bones. But he answered her call. She leaned low, spoke words in the guttural, molten tongue of old Valyria. Dracarys. A ribbon of fire spilled from his jaws, sweeping along the row of wildfire barrels. The emerald tongues ignited instantly, racing down fuse lines in geometric patterns scrawled by pyromancers. Flames bloomed outward, curling over the street like the petals of a toxic flower. Wood and stone burst, sending shards spinning. The heat punched against Daenerys' face. Her hair whipped back, sparked at the ends. Drogon banked away, but low, the torn wing inch away from stall rooftops. Knights fell back, shielding heads. Cersei's mare reared. She clutched mane, teeth gritted. Jaime spurred forward, intercepting a wight that had crawled from a sewer grate, lopping its head before it reached the queen. The avenue became an inferno corridor. Walls, doors, banners all ablaze, fusing into a tunnel of green fury. At its far end, against the glow, the lieutenant appeared, striding from the quay. Flames painted her in silhouette, haloed by cold vapor swirling from her blades. She paused at the threshold of wildfire, as though testing its heat. Then she raised a sword and stepped through. The green flames recoiled where her blades swung, parting to either side like curtains. Ice formed a sheath around her, absorbing, diverting, suppressing. Each step she took left planks of the pier smoldering, only to crackle and freeze moments later. Behind her, wights followed single file, granted passage by her power. Tyrion watched from the wall, horror knotting his gut. "7 take me," he whispered. "She walks through hell." Daenerys wheeled Drogon. Again she urged, but the dragon's chest heaved only smoke. His stores were spent. He could no longer exhale enough flame to drown that corridor. She cursed softly. Jaime saw the lieutenant advancing past the first row of barrels, wildfire bleeding off her armor. He shouted to Brienne. She spurred her destrier, charging down a side alley that bisected the avenue. Knights followed, spears ready to thrust from flanks. The plan had never accounted for the Dead's commander marching through the very fire. Plans seldom survived first sight of the enemy. Arya burst from a rooftop above the wildfire corridor, dropping to a balcony beam. She moved as smoke, feet landing silent. The lieutenant was below, progress slowed by heat that even her shield of ice could not fully dispel. Arya measured the distance, too far for a dagger throw through rippling air. She scanned for any vantage behind. Catspaw's Valyrian blade thrummed in her hand. She recalled the word Syria once spoke. A cat of the canals uses every window, every barrel, every shadow. She leapt to a creaking signboard jutting over the street, crouched, then sprang again across open fire to a shattered statue head, whose marble remained too hot for frost to cling. There she paused, breath short, ribs stabbing, waiting for the lieutenant to draw nearer. At Fishmonger's Square, the third wave hit as the wildfire blast lit the eastern sky. The Whites' frenzy doubled. They rammed the shield wall with abandon. Some crashed upon spears and kept wriggling, clambering up shafts toward living faces. Joan's arm numbed from countless strikes. He glimpsed Davos fending off four at once, the old knight's blade a blur. Suddenly, the dead retreated a step. Confused shouts rose. They falter. Then Grey Worm cried out, an alert, not triumph. The Whites were not breaking. They were reshaping, massing into narrow prongs aimed at 2 points. Jon realized, piercing maneuver. They sought to slip between Unsullied and Northmen, reach the city heart. Without the Night King's command, they still obeyed some will. Hers. Center, forward. Jon yelled. He and Grey Worm shoved shoulder to shoulder, meeting the spear of Whites at the tip. Teeth gnashed inches from Jon's cheek before Longclaw severed jaw from skull. Another White caught his forearm. Icy fingers like iron. He jammed his shield edge under its chin, forcing head back while a wildling drove a hatchet into spine. All at once, the dead stiffened. A ripple passed through ranks. Spasms, jittering limbs, heads jerked skyward as if hearing distant thunder. Then they howled, all together, a noise like stone scraping stone, and hurled themselves backward, disengaging. Jon blinked sweat from frozen lashes. What in the... Look! Davos pointed. Over rooftop peaks to the east, a plume of green fire soared, then shrank, then vanished. And with it went the eerie chorus. The Whites stood motionless for a dozen heartbeats. One by one they toppled, limbs locking. They had not shattered, they had ceased. Across the square, thousands of bodies now littered the pavement, inert. Silence flooded in, echoing sudden, catastrophic. Jon exhaled. The night air tasted of ash and salt and snow. He looked at Grey Worm. The eunuch's eyes, always unreadable, shone with something akin to awe. Jon slid Longclaw into its scabbard, though his hand shook too badly to catch the sheath at first. Is it done? A northern spearman whispered. Let's bloody hope. Davos wiped his brow. But hopes for mornings. We must confirm. Jon nodded. Form search parties. Check every alley. If any White still moves, call out. As men set about the grim task, Jon climbed the collapsed statue of Beeler for higher view. Wad. The city still burned, but the ice spires along the wall had ceased growing. Some even sagged, water dripping where before only frost solidified. He could see the docks. A forest of flame licking at the hull of the ghost ship, smoke sooty black now rather than emerald. Above the inferno a dark shape circled. Drogon, wings extended but banking low, protective. Jon's breath caught. Where were Daenerys, Arya, the others? He loosed a long whistle, trusting Arya might hear, though doubt plagued him. The wind carried no answer. The lieutenant emerged from the wildfire corridor at last, but not unchanged. Her ice armor now rippled with hairline fissures that leaked vapor. The tips of her twin blades glowed faintly where green fire still clung, eating inward like acid. She paused at the avenue's mouth, as though sensing the shifting tide. Around her, the Whites stalled mid-stride, eyes unfocused. She looked left, saw the burning barrels behind. Looked right, saw Drogon limping higher along the seawall. In that instant, Arya leapt. She dropped from statue head, dagger reversed. The lieutenant reacted with inhuman speed, raising a sword to parry. But the blade, hairline cracks laced, shattered on impact with Catspaw's Valyrian steel. Shards blossomed outward in a halo of ice dust. Arya used the broken moment to pivot mid-air, switching grip as she had done at Winterfell. She drove the dagger toward the lieutenant's throat. A hand of clamped ice seized Arya's wrist. The lieutenant's eyes blazed brighter. Frost crawled up Arya's arm, numbing nerve, turning skin pale. She gasped, teeth rattling. Yet she let go the dagger, let it fall toward her other hand. A move perfected long ago. But the lieutenant anticipated. Her second blade swung. Steel rang. Brienne's longsword blocked the strike, intercepting a hair's breadth from Arya's abdomen. Brienne roared, pushing the lieutenant back. The ice blade chipped but did not crack wholly. Arya rolled aside, blood returning in painful pricks. "Grateful," she muttered through chattering teeth. "Finish this," Brienne answered, eyes locked on foe. Jaime thundered up on horseback, lance leveled. He drove forward, but the lieutenant spun, slicing the lance in two. Horse screamed, "Shine!" Jaime tumbled, rolled to feet, gold hand cracking stone. He kept sword ready. Cersei, unmounted during earlier melee, strode from behind a toppled cart, holding a crossbow, the same weapon her father once wielded. She drew bead on the lieutenant, jaw clenched. The quarrel's head had been replaced with a dragon-glass arrowhead, hastily fashioned by Qyburn. She fired. The bolt sped, but the lieutenant twisted. Bolt grazed shoulder, spinning off in shower of sparks. For the first time, the lieutenant staggered. Steam jetted from wound where dragonglass lodged shallow, sizzling like iron in rain. Arya saw opening. She lunged, cat's paw poised. But the lieutenant thrust palm outward. A plume of razor ice erupted from the cobbles, a wall ascending to the height of a man in an eye blink, separating them. The shockwave knocked Arya back. On the far side of the wall, the lieutenant darted toward the docks, moving with jerky urgency. Wildfire still burned there, but its heat seemed to wound her. Cracks widened. Hunks of ice sloughed off. Still, she ran. Tyrion atop the wall saw her flight. "Now," he bellowed to unseen archers. A volley of pitch-soaked arrows lanced down, tails aflame. Most bounced from her icy hide, but one lodged near the dragonglass bolt, igniting fissures. Spirals of bluish fire raced along her chest. She faltered, stumbled to knees. Brienne and Jaime hacked at the ice wall, chipping enough for Arya to slip through. She ran, feet skittering on glassy stones. Behind came Brienne's heavier footfalls, Jaime limping after. The lieutenant rose again, slower, reaching the very lip of the quay. Water below was half frozen, flows knocking hulls. She stretched a hand toward the waves, as if summoning something deeper. Arya closed within 6 paces. She hurled a throwing knife, dragonglass shard bound to handle. It struck the lieutenant's forearm. Crackles shot across entire limb, fingers shattered, and fell like broken icicles. The lieutenant screamed, high, keening, a sound that sent ripples through ice sheets across the bay. But she did not fall. Instead, she flung her remaining sword end over end into the water, where it sank beneath ice floes, leaving a glowing trail. Arya lunged again, dagger raised. The lieutenant caught her wrist with the stump of fractured hand, though fingers missed. Arya twisted, ripped free, and buried Catspaw in the crystal breastplate, where dragonglass bolts still seared. Blade sank to hilt. A pulse of blinding blue surged outward. Arya felt weightless, hair lifting, ears ringing. She wrenched the dagger upward. The lieutenant's eyes widened. Light swelled within, brighter, brighter, then burst. The body fragmented, plates of ice flinging outward in concentric blast. Arya was thrown back into Brienne's waiting arms. Shards tinkled across the quay like hail. Where the lieutenant stood remained only a swirling column of steam that rose into night, like a spirit freed. At that same heartbeat, a thunderclap echoed citywide. Every white still stirring collapsed. Joints locking, torsos coil cracking, skulls exploding into frost. On the square, Jon saw a sea of bodies twitch once and then lay still forever. Ice spires on walls slumped, dissolving. Frost retreated from stones like a tide reversed. Drogon banked low over docks, releasing a triumphant roar that shook rigging on burning ships. Fire answered, wild and golden, now that blue sorcery no longer tempered its heat. Jaime slid to his knees beside Arya, who panted, "Vision swimming." Brienne steadied them both. Cersei approached, crossbow slack. She stared at the steam plume dissolving into starless heavens, understanding dawning that death itself had been given death. For a monster, she whispered. She died beautifully. No, Arya said, voice hoarse. She died rightly. She looked toward the water where the ice sword had sunk. Bubbles still rose, but the glow beneath faded. Nothing else stirred. Dawn rose gray and weary over King's Landing. Snow still fell, but flakes melted upon touching streets now slick with slush. Fires smoldered under collapsed roofs, staining the air with black ribbons. The Red Keep's towers leaned at odd angles where ice had torn masonry, yet they still stood. Bells, cracked though they were, tolled ragged, not a triumphal peal, but a mourning hymn. In the Fishmonger's Square, survivors stacked corpses of whites, now inert flesh, into pyramids to be burned. Jon walked among them, checking for movement, though none came. He found Tormund's body under the giant still, face frozen in grin. He knelt, closed the wildling's eyes, murmured the old prayer of the free folk asked of him seasons ago beyond the wall. Grey Worm organized ration lines, distributing dried fish thawed over braziers. Northerners and Lannisters alike accepted bowls. Hands shaking, Davos directed carpenters to fell charred timbers for pyres. His own hands blistered where the axe handle rubbed. In the dock's quarter denaries, oversaw healers tending Drogon Dada. They stitched membrane with sailcloth, sealed wounds with crushed obsidian paste, that Qyburn swore would draw out frost poison. The dragon endured, groaning deep in his chest, but his eyes tracked his queen's every movement. She whispered affection in Valyrian, one hand never leaving his brow. Tyrion, limping, surveyed the quay. The wildfire barrels were empties now, but their cost was evident in gutted warehouses. Smoke curled from ash heaps where grain once lay. He could almost hear the voice of Tywin chastising him for destroying riches of the realm. But what realm remained, if not living? Jaime approached, Cersei in tow. Both looked older, thinner, yet share a strange quiet peace. The people will need food, Jaime said. Tyrion met Cersei's eyes, saw resignation there. The Reach still grows wheat, he answered. We send riders. Perhaps the new Queen of Thorns shows mercy. Mercy must be earned, Cersei said, voice low. Tyrion gestured to the pyres, the wounded, the frozen streets thawing under weak sun. We begin paying today. Brienne knelt on the quay's edge beside Arya, washing dried blood from the younger woman's arms. Arya hissed when cold water touched nerves burnt by frost. Hurts less than being dead, she muttered. You saved the world. Brienne offered a scrap of cloth. Arya shook her head. No, we saved a city. The world's still out there. She looked to the ragged skyline. But I'll take one morning more. Brienne smiled faintly. One at a time. Jon found Daenerys near midday, leaning on Drogon's flank, eyes closing from exhaustion. He laid a hand on her shoulder. She turned, the fire in her gaze banked to gentle coals. It's over, he said. Is it? Her voice carried both relief and weight. The dead lie still, but winter has not ended. The realm is broken. Broken can be mended. He gestured to workers clearing rubble. Gold cloaks hauling wounded to makeshift infirmaries. Children scavenging for unspoiled eggs, and sharing among themselves. Yet life begins anew, the moment death's shadow lifts. She nodded. Will they accept me now, after wildfire and ice? They will accept who saves them, not who claims them. He offered a rueful smile. Perhaps a council chooses its ruler. Perhaps the realm has learned kings and queens are mortal pieces in a larger game. She studied him, the weight of prophecies cracking like thin ice beneath. And you? I'm tired of crowns. He looked to the north, though Wall and Winterfell lay far beyond horizon. But I have promises to keep. Daenerys placed her hand atop his. We rebuild together. Then you may keep them. That evening, as the first true sunset in days bled crimson over the bay, the survivors gathered in the Grand Seps courtyard. Its shattered arches framing a sky scrubbed clean of storm. Jon and Daenerys lit the first pyre together, wood soaked with lamp oil. piled high with white corpses. Arya and Sansa arrived with scouts after word traveled faster than ravens. Sang the old barrow song, voices low. Grey Worm offered the Valyrian salute of the Unsullied. Brienne knelt, sword planted. Jaime stood behind Cersei, their fingers intertwined loosely. No crown between them. Flames rose, orange and hungry, devouring the dead and the fear they embodied. Sparks spiraled up to stars just emerging. One by one, other pyres caught, in the square, at the docks, along the walls. Fire bloomed across King's Landing not as a weapon, but as a rite of cleansing. Tyrion stepped beside his brother and sister. "Strange," he murmured. "How fire, which once threatened to consume us, now warms again." "Fire is a sword," Jaime said. "The hand that wields decides its justice." Cersei stared into the blaze. For first time in years, her eyes softened. "Perhaps we try to be just," she whispered. Tyrion tilted his head. "A good start." He sipped weak wine. "Tomorrow we find out what a city reborn demands of its leaders." Jaime arched a brow. "Leaders? Plural?" "The realm is large," Tyrion said. "And it has room for many hands willing to mend rather than break." Beyond them, Jon and Daenerys stood together, silhouettes against firelight. Snowflakes drifted, but melted before landing, caught in the rising heat. The night smelled of smoke and thaw. Not the cold charnel stench of earlier, but a pungency of earth awakening under spring plow. Somewhere a babe cried, somewhere laughter met it, and somewhere a raven flew carrying news of dawn. High above, Drogon unfurled injured wings. He groaned, testing span against cool breeze. Though tethered by pain, he faced the sky, nostrils glowing. Soon, he seemed to say, he would fly again. And the city, still smoldering, would rise too. On pillars of hope forged from ice and fire and the fragile stubborn hearts of those who dared, in the darkest hour, to stand against the night. Da. Candeliano. Ash and snow mingled in low drifts that fumed gently where embers still glowed beneath. So the very streets seemed alive, exhaling small sighs of steam that curled through the orange wash of torchlight. Dawn had passed, yet the sky stayed the color of hammered pewter. Only a weak sun behind thick cloud hinted at day. The survivors worked on regardless of the hour, for time had lost its tidy numerals, replaced by the slower beat of rebuilding hearts and the quicker pang of empty bellies. Beneath the ragged frame of the Red Keep's outer curtain, Daenerys supervised the quartermasters, who now served bread from broken grain stores. It was coarse, stretched with mashed roots and whatever seeds could be raked up from burst sacks. But it was warm and smelled faintly of cumin. The line of hungry mouths snaked past shattered pillars, and every time the pot stirred, she listened for the scrape that meant the last ladle. Every time it scraped, she felt a little of the queen inside her shiver. Across the courtyard, Jon Snow knelt beside a cart where dead wolves, real wolves, pets of small folk, perhaps even strays drawn by the scent of charred flesh, lay curled in icy repose. He had collected them gently, draping torn banners over their bodies, telling the boys tasked with lifting them that northern customs demanded beasts be honored equal to men. The boys believed him because he spoke with the gravity that still clung to him after slaying death itself. When the last animal was covered, he rose, wiped soot on his thigh, and noticed the hush, the idle chatter between stonemason and scribe, the crack of splintering beams, the steady clop of hooves from the gate. Everything faded to accommodate the soft whicker of a horse approaching. Sansa Stark rode at the head of a small column, her cloak fox red against the ashen world. With her came Maester Wolkan, 20 mounted guards from Winterfell, and wagons piled high with salt pork and dried ling. Jon hurried down the rubble-strewn steps, boots crunching glass. Sansa dismounted before he reached her, and they embraced without a word, just two weary children clutching the last piece of home they recognized. Behind them, the Northerners offloaded barrels. The smell of smoked meat traveled fast, and suddenly soldiers who had forgotten how to hope remembered how to salivate. Inside the shattered dragon pit, Tyrion stood on a dais improvised from upturned doors, addressing a gathering as strange as any maester's riddle. Grey Worm and his captains, Brienne and Sir Podrick, their cloaks patched with new sword and star badges Sansa had sewn on the ride south. Lord Gendry of Storm's End, looking uncomfortably clean in borrowed doublet. Samwell Tarly, quill stuck behind one ear. Yara Greyjoy impatient. Tyrion raised 2 fingers for silence. "We are 6 days from the last burst of wildfire," he began. "We have food enough for perhaps 10 more if the Reach wagons do not arrive. Sewers overflow with melted ice and blood. Half the wells taste of soot, yet the wind has turned from the north and blows from the sea. This, my friends, is what passes for good news." Yara snorted. "I have ships that can ferry grain from Old Town within the week, if the harbor clears." "It will," Tyrion assured her. "Jaime has set men with pickaxes to crack the river ice. Flames still lick the sluices. Strange to say, wildfire is thawing our trade routes faster than any sun." "Mighty," Cersei's voice cut softly, like a knife sliding from velvet. "And my people starve while we celebrate logistics. Where's the justice promised at the pyres?" Samwell answered, surprising all by firmness. "Justice begins with bread, your Cersei. A soup kettle feeds better than a gallows." He met her eyes, and for once she looked away first. Brienne cleared her throat. "Bedding and medicine are worse want than bread." The sisters' sept collapsed. "My stonemasons found a cellar still intact. We can convert it to a ward if we strip the Red Keep's linen." "Yes." Jon entered then, cloak still dusted with wolf hair. "Take the linen," he said. "The throne room's marble floor sleeps no worse for being bare." He surveyed them all. "We can argue walls and titles later. The living need us now." A smile ghosted across Tyrion's mouth, exhausted relief at seeing another voice carry weight. "Well said. First task, rationing and housing." He tapped a ledger. "Second, message riders to every corner of Westeros. Highgarden, Dorne, the Vale. Tell them the long night reached their capital and was broken. But the break costs dear. We need seed grain, livestock, masons and arms to hold the peace while hunger prowls. They..." Jaime shifted, raising his golden hand. "And the matter of government? A city ruled by committee collapses under its own debates." He glanced at Cersei, an old habit, and then at Daenerys, who had arrived silent in Drogon's shadow, unarmored save for the soot freckles on her cheeks. She met his look without hostility, though the dragons in her eyes stirred. "We cannot crown one ruler on a mountain of ash," she said. "Not until the survivors themselves speak. Let the lords come. Let the small folk send 3 representatives each. We will gather in this pit where once beasts were caged, and build a table no one man can burn." Gendry scratched his beard. "Sounds like a council." "Oh, council," Jon agreed. "Permanent. Those chosen by the folk serve for years, then yield to new voices. A king who cannot behead will learn to persuade." Tyrion's brows climbed. "Democracy." He tasted the word as though it were Dornish peppers. Intriguing. Dangerous. "Very well. But who keeps order until the first vote? An empty captain's seat invites mutiny." "No." 3 regents," Sansa said from the doorway, her voice clear as cold water. "One from north, one from south, one from Dragonstone. They break ties, direct supplies, answer only to the council once formed." She stepped forward. "I nominate Jon Snow for the north." Gasps rustled. Jon flushed. Tyrion bowed fractionally. Sense and symbolism both. Dragonstone obviously falls to Daenerys. She still commands the last dragon and a queen, whether with crown or without. As for the south, eyes turned to Cersei. She stiffened like a bird sensing the snare. "You would trust me with power?" she asked. "The lioness who once vowed to burn this city rather than lose it." "No," Jaime said quietly. "We would trust you to keep it alive because now you know how close you came to losing everything, including yourself." He touched her hand, the one not clutching rank or scepter, merely trembling with fatigue. "Prove the prophecy wrong, Cersei. Protect the children still breathing." Brienne added, "A Southrone seat without Lannister blood would spur rebels who think this all northern trickery. Better the devil shorn of claws than a fresh fiend with hidden knives." "Betty." Cersei closed her eyes. She remembered the roar of wildfire under the sept, the taste of victory, the emptiness after. "Very well," she whispered. "But we remove the Iron Throne from its hall. Melt it, reshape the swords into plowshares or fetters for criminals, whatever pleases the smiths. I have sat on that chair and felt it cut my pride. No symbol tempts ruin again." Daenerys' mouth parted, shock, then slow approval. "And Drogon will be the fire," she said. "He forged the table in Dragonstone once. He can unforge a tyrant's seat. Mantower." Thus the regency was agreed. 2 days later, in the charred throne room, a crowd of several hundred, nobles in singed silk, potboys in boiled leather, fisherwives with soot in their braids, stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the Iron Throne bathed in lamplight. Its barbs of twisted Valyrian steel still gleamed, but cracks spidered where wildfire heat had warped it. In places, the swords' hilts were fused, unrecognizable relics of nameless soldiers. Jon, Daenerys, and Cersei approached side by side, while Tyrion read aloud an edict dissolving all royal seals until the council convened. When he finished, Jaime stepped forward, carrying a leather satchel stuffed with raven scrolls, records of debts, grants, executions ordered by generations of kings. He tossed them onto the throne seat, parchment fluttering like pale ghosts. Drogon lumbered through the doors, claws scrabbling, his great wounded wing bound in sailcloth. The crowd parted, awe and terror. Daenerys laid a hand on his jawline. "Dracarys," she whispered, voice steady though tears rimmed her eyes. The dragon inhaled. A thin jet of flame, no wider than a handspan, lanced forth, set the parchments alight. Heat rose, metal ribs glowed red. Slowly, inexorably, the throne sagged. Swords drooped like candles. Steel wept rivulets that pooled at the dais foot, hissing on cool marble. When the fire ceased, a heap of molten slag remained, unshaped promise, nothing more. A silence deeper than prayer followed. Then an old washerwoman near the doorway began to clap. 3 tentative pats of raw palms. A sellsword joined, then a maester, then the whole hall thundered with applause. Not triumph. Release. The chains of lineage were cooling at their feet. Even victory, however, cannot still rumors. On the 5th night after the melting, Davos found Jon alone atop the ruined city wall, staring north where the King's Road cut a charcoal streak through trampled snow. Lantern bugs glimmered over the char fields like embers refusing to die. "Your Grace, Jon. Word is the Golden Company remnants muster in Tarth. Kevins fell, second son of Straitsmark, claims he was promised gold enough to found his own kingdom. Denis." Jon exhaled frost. Gold died with Cersei's coffers, but men chase lies when hunger leads. He rubbed his jaw, stubble rough. "We cannot fight mercenaries with skeleton crews. Better to bribe them, but we have no coin either." "There is the Iron Bank," Davos offered, "and they will back whichever side shows better rates." Jon's laugh held only weariness. "No, we must offer them land and share in rebuilding, not coin." He looked back at the city. "Issue charters. Anyone who helps clear rubble earns plots outside the city walls for vineyard or workshop. Labor for land. Aegon's conqueror once gave such gifts." "I'll draft the decree," Davos said, though he doubted parchment alone convinced Sellswords. Still, a plan was a pillar. In ruins, pillars mattered. Below, Arya sparred with Podrick among blackened colonnades, wooden sticks flicking faster than mouse tails. Every so often she paused, pressed a hand to her ribs, then resumed. The bruise across her chest was the map of the battle. Purple coastline, yellow mountains, red rivers, yet she fought because movement dulled memory. Sansa watched, sewing new standards for the council sessions, a circle of 9 white stars on deep blue, each star representing one region of the realm. "No crown, no sword," she told the seamstress from the Street of Sisters. "Just the sky all men share, waiting for peace." The seamstress smiled. "Pretty sky, but storms still come." Sansa nodded, thread continued. Brienne met Jaime nightly, in what remained of the White Sword Tower. They catalogued surviving Kingsguard journals, hunting any scrap that might name the night raised as white. It mattered to Jaime that penance have a face. He intended the rebuilt guard to carry memory of that horror, so duty never again became blind. Brienne copied passages in neat handwriting, though now and then the quill slipped as her thoughts wandered to Podrick's earnest questions about honor, to Sansa's quiet strength, and to Jaime himself, whose gold hand no longer seemed obstacle but symbol. Loss can forge better things. Cersei rarely slept. She walked the silent corridors where icicles still dripped, speaking to ghosts. In the gallery of tapestries she halted before one showing Rhaenyra's dragons burning the harvests of the Reach. History she once found instructive. Now she saw only frightened farmers fleeing flames. Her fingers touched scorch marks left when the gallery ceiling collapsed, and she wondered what the Seven would judge. A queen who spared none, then turned regent to spare all. Redemption tasted like ash, but she swallowed it. On the 12th dawn, the First Lords arrived for council. Lord Royce of the Vale, glue-thick accent solemn. Old Lord Mathis Rowan hobbling on gout-swollen legs. Lady Olenna's grandniece Octavia Tyrell, eyes keen as peregrine. Others rode behind, minor houses whose banners had never before flown on the capital's walls. They camped among ruins outside so space within stayed for commoners. Jon greeted each, explained the voting shells. Smooth stones dyed 3 colors. Black for against, white for in favor, red for abstain. Votes cast anonymously into an iron cauldron cooled from the throne metal. He expected ridicule but found curiosity instead. War breeds new appetites. That night in the dragon pit, by torchlight, Daenerys sat at the phoenix-shaped table newly forged from throne metal, hammered into feather patterns by smiths of Qohor, who claimed lineage from those who reforged ice. Beside her Jon and Cersei listened while farmers suggested crop rotations, while maesters proposed canals to drain slush floods into cisterns, while septons pled for orphans. Each speaker placed a problem before the regents and left a name for the roster so future councils could summon them. When an old man with grease-black fingernails requested coin to build smokehouses for herring, Cersei asked how many mouths herring could feed through a winter. 10,000, if salted, he said. She signed his petition without hesitation. Between sessions, Tyrion took account of coins melted inside the throne. Mixed with slag, they formed lumps, dull and heavy, but Qyburn assured value remained if reminted. They scraped cinders into sacks. For every sack Cersei allocated 2 to grain caravans, 1 to the new infirmary, and 1 to a fund paying orphan street sweepers to clear rubble. Money moved like blood, clotted, but at least flowing. Grey Worm accepted a different task, leading unsullied patrols beyond the city to track remaining whites, though rumors said all collapsed. He found only frozen corpses rotting slowly where the Night King's magic died. On the 3rd patrol, a pack of wolves followed, not attacking, simply watching those who once enslaved them. One dark bitch with silver eyes trotted beside Grey Worm a mile before veering into forest. He later told Missandei's memory he had not felt fear in her presence, only kinship between soldiers freed from chains. Yet all progress bled under the next crisis, plague. First a dock worker coughed blood, then 3 children at the improvised ward. Maester Walken identified chilblain rot, lungs scourged by mixing smoke and frost for days. It spread via soot-coated blankets handed out too freely. Sansa convened healers. Sam produced tinctures of pine resin. Tyrion ordered every chimney swept clear. Cersei thundered at stablemasters to turn manures into compost outside city walls, not under windows. Daenerys had Drogon breathe gentle flame into warehouses to purge mold. The people watched in awe, cheering not in fear but gratitude for warmth. Still, dozens died. Arya stood torch vigil throughout one black night, naming each corpse she carried to the pyres. When dawn painted her cheeks gray, she found Bran waiting in the arch of the Dragon Gate. Arrived from the north on wagon, wheelchair carved of heartwood. His eyes, all-seeing, watched the city smoke. "You list names," he told Arya, "because you fear forgetting." She answered, "If no one remembers, they never live." Bran nodded. Then remember also that living is more than not dying. Live." She blinked, and he rolled away to counsel the regents on river flow. He had glimpsed high spring floods, said levees must be raised. The council voting commenced under a sky finally pricked by stars unblurred by ash. 3 days of debate hammered charters into law. Each region elects 9 delegates. Each delegate serves 3 years. No army may march without 2/3 approval. Dragons, should they breed again, answer to a committee of maesters and dragon riders, never sole monarch. Cersei's mouth twitched when that clause passed. Half smile, half rue. She cast a white stone for it nonetheless. The last motion concerned where to seat the council permanently. Some argued the dragon pit symbolized chains broken. Others demanded a new hall untouched by war. Jon listened, then proposed they rotate sessions. Summer in Old Town, autumn in the Eyrie, winter in Winterfell, spring in King's Landing when blooms return. Travel would remind lords the realms spanned more than their doorstep. To his surprise, the Blackstones outnumbered white. The High Lords feared distance from their keeps. Daenerys set her red stone in the urn, abstain, while Cersei lifted a white. Tyrion counted. Tied. By charter, regents break ties. Daenerys glanced at Jon. Then at Cersei, who merely raised an eyebrow. With calm breath, Daenerys set a second white stone on behalf of Dragonstone. Thus the realm would wander, never again letting capital become cradle of arrogance. After the session, Jon confronted her beneath cracked colonnade. "Why support me?" She shrugged. "Because you were right. Rulers must walk among those they claim to serve. And because I trust the North to host council without freezing delegates alive." He almost smiled. She added, "Besides, Drogon enjoys mountain thermals." They parted when Gendry arrived, babbling about forge plans for new coins. The phoenix mark bearing no king's face? Only the rising bird. Jon watched Daenerys walk away, pale braids swaying, and wondered whether love might rise again from ruins as easily as currency. Spring approached in shy steps. Buds appeared on blackened branches, tentative, but insistent. The River Gate ice dam broke one dawn, sending shards down Blackwater Rush with cheerful clatter. Children raced the banks, cheering the flows like knights at tourney. Atop Egan's Hill, masons laid foundations for a hospice paid by Cersei's personal coffers. She visited daily, setting bricks with her own aching hands. Septus watched in astonishment, whispering that miracles had not ended with the Night King. Jaime oversaw new training yards where Unsullied drilled with Lannister recruits, using blunted spears tipped in dragonglass fragments that shattered plank shields delightfully. He laughed when a recruit split his breastplate, because memory told him pride hurts more than bruises. Brienne laughed too, then helped the boy adjust stance. Sansa negotiated grain convoys paying in phoenix marks stamped hot from Gendry's forge. The Iron Bank sent representatives who sniffed at coin with no royal visage, until Daenerys arrived astride Drogon, landing near their galleys so gently no wave rocked the pier. But the heat of her arrival peeled gold leaf from the bankers' ledgers. They offered loans at once. Arya vanished for 2 weeks, returning wearing northern leathers and a Valyrian steel needle to pair with cat's paw. She reported lands beyond the Trident clear of white remains, though rumors spoke of specters haunting the ruins of Harrenhal. Bran listened, tapped raven feather quills, and said Time's river carried eddies, but the main current flowed true. The dead slept. On the eve of the Provisional Council's dissolution, its work complete enough to yield to elected voices, the Phoenix Festival began. Tents sprouted along the shores, painted with stories of ice and fire. Musicians played lutes fashioned from salvaged ship spars. Bakeries sold dragon-shaped sweetbread. Daenerys walked incognito among stalls, cloak-hooded, sampling lemon cakes. She found Jon teaching orphans to carve soapstone wolves. He grinned, cheeks dusted with flour from dough he kneaded earlier. Together they watched Drogon wing overhead, now healed enough to glide, casting ripples of applause as his shadow passed. At night, a flotilla of lantern boats drifted downriver. Each carried a candle for a name lost, tens of thousands flickering like migrating souls. On the ramparts Tyrion stood with Sam, cups of mead in hand. Think they'll manage without a king? Sam asked. They will have many kings, Tyrion replied, but none with crowns. Ideas rule hearts longer than iron. He sipped, wincing at sweetness. I am still hand, it seems, though now I serve a chair of 9 legs, not one. Sam chuckled. Better weight distributed. You would speak in carpentry. Tyrion watched lanterns. Do you think our tales will live beyond us? I think they already have, Sam said, gesturing. Children chased fireflies, imitating Jon's swing or Arya's leap. Vendors sold carved wooden lions with broken crowns. Singers composed ballads of the queen who melted her throne. Stories sprout faster than weeds. Tyrion inclined his cup to the stars. Then let this one root deep. Far north, beyond Last Hearth, ice still mantled valleys. In a cave overlooking a frozen tarn, a single shard of the Night King's broken breastplate lay embedded in rock, faint blue glow pulsing like a dying heart. Snow drifted in, covering it grain by grain until nothing shone. An old she-bear lumbered past, sniffed the wind, and moved on. The forest was silent, waiting. Back in King's Landing, dawn pushed over rooftops, gilding scaffold poles, warming stone to first whispers of summer. The first elected delegates would arrive within a fortnight, bringing petitions of commerce, schooling, border disputes. All that lay ahead, yet for one still, amber-lit morning, the city breathed easier than it had in living memory. In the rebuilt garden outside the Red Keep, 3 saplings grew. An ash, a weirwood gifted by Sansa, and a sapling lemon tree from Braavos. Jon watched Daenerys kneel to pack soil around their roots. She pressed a hand to each trunk, murmured blessings in Valyrian. When she stood, her eyes met his. Hope mirrored twice. Across the yard, Cersei guided orphans planting marigolds. Jaime consulted with masons on terrace supports. Brienne sparred Podrick under peach blossoms that somehow survived. Grey Worm sat carving tiny terracotta warriors, placing them at sapling bases, a guard for new life. The realm remained shattered glass in many places, but the shards now lay in sunlit hands, patient enough to piece them into mosaics finer than before. And among those hands no single grip squeezed too tight, for all had learned that to clutch power is to risk freezing one's own heart. The wind shifted again, carrying fragrance of turned soil rather than smoke. Somewhere, a lark sang tentative notes. Drogon answered from his perch atop the Phoenix Tower, a rumble that shook petals loose, swirling white and gold flakes through the air. They fell on shoulders of queens and commoners alike, indistinguishable, and melted there. Proof that winter, even the darkest, yields when hearts take flame,